over the last few episodes, we've been recalling our incredible voyage from Indonesia to Malaysia, well over 1,000 miles of fantastic sailing and some beautiful places. But along the way, like any time, there were a few problems. And some of these problems were worse than others. I mean, we had water spouts, we had whiteouts, we had incredible strange things in the water, all kinds of objects and hazards. Various things happened to us. So it got us thinking, what are the 5 worst things that have happened to us over the 20 years we've been sailing? And what have we learned from those occurrences? Hello, I'm Liz.
And I'm Jamie.
Welcome to Follow the Boat, in which we discuss what it's really like to give it all up to live on a boat.
And go travelling around the world. We've been doing it since 2006 and we're still at it.
Each week we talk about our latest YouTube video.
And about boats, sailing, travel or anything else which floats into our heads.
And if you leave a comment we like, we'll give you an answer and a name check. Peace and fair winds.
So in order to keep this week's podcast relevant, I found myself a body of water. And it is what was once the centre of London town. It's the bustling Docklands. And it's still bustling now, in fact, because as I stand here, there's lots of Uber commuter boats that buzz up and down the Thames, delivering all the commuters to and from their places of residence, which is pretty much every single building you see nowadays, to their places of work. But anyway.
One of the things I remember most is the first one we're going to talk about.
2013, Maldives knockdown. Now, this was when we were crossing over the equator to get to the southern part of the Maldives to eventually continue on to South Africa. Now, I can't remember if we had just mistimed it or if the southwest monsoon came in early, but we were hit by some ferocious weather, which pinned us down into the Maldives, and in fact culminated in one of the worst trips we've ever had, and that was when we ended up spending 24 hours at sea, and after 24 hours ended up in the same spot.
We've been sailing very nicely all day, the sea was flat, the winds were good, we had the sails out and we were making good progress. We were quite a way offshore outside one of the atolls, and we had another boat with us that was much closer in. So as night fell and we were going along very nicely, over the radio we suddenly got a call from Anthony saying, Esper, there's something hitting us now, it's going to hit you, look out, look out. So we didn't know what he meant, but by the time we'd even managed to start trying to decide what he meant, it hit us. And basically it was a gale, what turned out to be a gale that lasted really from then on. And I think it was a knockdown.
Now I know that the angle at which we were being pushed over in the water was so much that our old solar panels, which are shorter than our current ones, which we have hanging over the side of Esper at the back, were actually skimming through the water.
We have a centre cockpit, it's a deep centre cockpit. I was behind the wheel helming at the time, and the next thing I knew was that the water in the cockpit was over my knees. So I can't imagine any other way than the fact that we'd gone down. So pretty scary, lots of things we were doing wrong. But first of all, let me just tell you how we righted it. I was clinging onto the wheel and managed to be able to keep steering towards the wind to take some of that gust out of the sails and just to decelerate the boat. As we were hit by it, in fact, Jamie had been standing behind me against the mizzen mast, and he was lucky because the wind pushed him onto the mast. If he'd been on the other side, it would have been a different matter.
The wind sustained for such a long time that I couldn't move from the mizzen. Liz was on the helm, and what I was trying to do was to reef in the mizzen, and I just could not reef it in. It was stuck out fast.
It was dark, so we couldn't see very much.
Esper was forced over at such an angle that the bottom of those panels was slicing through the water, and I remember looking at them thinking, holy, this is pretty serious.
There's a lot of frantic rushing around the deck from Jamie as he's furled stuff away, put stuff away, cleared up the deck and made it nice and clean, while I remained on the helm, just holding us steadily into wind, just off the wind to keep too much power out. So we were all right, but there were many lessons learned, and the most obvious one, and I'm sure you're all screaming at us now, is that you should always reef at night. I think from that moment onwards, I don't think there's been a night when we haven't reefed. We've been close to not doing so, but we do always reef at night. We're not a racing boat. It isn't important how quickly we get somewhere, but it does matter how safe it is. So we always reef. So if something were to hit us that we weren't expecting, we haven't got too much sail out. Number two, we weren't wearing life jackets. Now, we don't wear life jackets a lot on the boat because we live full time and we can't spend 24 hours a day wearing life jackets. But we should wear them at night, and we should wear them in bad weather, and yes, we do. And not only that, we should tether. We learnt that particular trip that Jamie needed when he was going up front to be tethered properly, and he wasn't always, and he has never done that since. And the other thing, of course, is to always remain in the cockpit at night, especially when you're on your own. On that occasion, it was the two of us. It was early, so we hadn't gone into shift modes yet. But Jamie was just hanging on the back, untethered, no life jacket on, just standing there. And because we couldn't see this gale coming at us, he wasn't aware that it was about to hit, and so wasn't able to take evasive action. So lots of things we did wrong. That was the earlier days, and we did learn from that, and we hope that this teaches you guys a lesson too. Just don't get too cocky, be nice and safe.
Nearly hitting a reef in the Java Sea in 2018. Now, ironically, I had mentioned this little issue, shall we say, in our most recent episode as we were travelling back up out of the Java Sea towards Singapore, and I made mention of the fact that we almost ran aground, and that was one of the scariest situations we've ever put ourselves in. Now, we were making our way through some pretty tight reefs and some narrow passages.
We were heading through the island, through quite a big passage, but the passage was veering northwest and we wanted to go northeast. So we were looking to find a way to get through, and we looked at navionics and we looked at the satellite images, and we found what we thought looked like a good passage.
There was no one else around, and in fact there are very few people in this area altogether. Very few people live in this area. Anyway, as we were approaching a tiny little islet, there was a marked shallow patch, let's say. Now on navionics it had it down as, I think it was 20 metres minimum depth.
I think this is something that Jamie will remember more than me because he was on the wheel.
We went over this patch, and that is when I saw our depth drop from 20 metres to 5 metres in the space of seconds. And it was so quick that the ground came up and I could see the seabed. I could actually see us going over the top of it.
That was very, very scary. I didn't think it was possible to reverse immediately in a boat, but he managed to do it. Yeah, we were heading straight towards a reef. How did we miss it? We had a lot of experience at that stage, and yet we still missed this reef.
Navionics was completely out, and you could barely see it on the satellite images as well. Lessons learned really is to take every single shallow patch with caution. Since that incident, I am so nervous, and rightly so, of shallow patches, and will avoid them. Even if it means taking a slight detour, I will always avoid them.
There should have been one of us at the front spotting. One of us should be there looking all the time. In dangerous areas like that, where you know that there are reefs and there are all kinds of hazards, you have to use your eyes. You can't just rely on satellite. So obviously this is something we say a lot, but we have cocked up ourselves, and that was one memorable occasion.
What made that situation particularly worrisome, though, is the fact that we were surrounded by nothing but islands. There, as I say, there was no one sort of living in this area. So if something had happened, the most that perhaps we could have done was to jump in the dinghy and to motor over to one of the little islands. And then what? We were out of radio contact, we were out of phone contact. And it really puts it in perspective when you have close encounters like that, is to that sort of fine line that you're balancing between clever, thoughtful navigation and life and death situations.
This list wouldn't be complete without an anchoring story, but this particular story is not about dragging or anchoring badly or anything like that. At this stage of the game, we really know what we're doing when it comes to anchoring, and we've talked about it so many times. I'm not going to talk about that side of anchoring, but what we are going to talk about is what you do when things go tits up in your anchorage.
Sorry for interrupting, but while I've got you here, if you like what we do and you want to support us and become a Patreon, or join us on FTB Mates, or even drop a quid in the rum fund, go to followtheboat.com/pub. Of course, come to the pub.
Liz reminded me of one that happened in Koa, which is the main port town of Langkawi. A big squall came through and there was how can you describe it? It was a sailboat, but it was an old wooden sailboat. I'm not sure if it was used for day trips, but it was sort of semi-permanently moored at this place, but it was on anchor. And we watched this thing literally travel from our starboard side on the bow, travel across us with a space of 50 metres and travel behind us down our port side. So it literally did a diagonal drag. So this was at anchor in very poor visibility with no one on board. And there was nothing we could do because, of course, if we were to pull up our anchor, that would put us even closer to the dragging boat. So we literally just sat in the cockpit and watched this thing. And that is just one of many situations.
Fishing platforms, some of which have their own engines, some of which are towed, and some of which are stationary. If they're stationary, they are normally, if they never move, anchored very securely to the seabed because the local people who own them don't want them moving around. So if you've got that kind of fishing platform near you, you're probably okay if the wind picks up. However, having said that, some of them are very decrepit and you do see them breaking away now and again. So think about that. Think about where you're anchoring. We have anchored in places where they've been brought in, the fishermen have gone off to sleep on land overnight, during the day or overnight or whatever it is. They've left the platform there. And it's usually secured with a small block going over the side attached to a rope, which is fine. If there's no wind at all, if it's nice and still, it won't move around, and if it does, it'll be a very small amount. And this one, a particular occasion I can think of in Anambas, we got to know these guys very well. In fact, we went on their platform and they gave us lots of bits and pieces. But the wind picked up, always does at night, always does at the worst possible time. So it was dark, it was windy, we could see nothing, there was no visibility, but we could definitely see this fishing platform, which had a few lights on it, hurtling towards us through the storm. We had to move fast and we were able to pick our anchor up and get out. But of course, when it is a whiteout and when you're in a dangerous situation where the depths are not really that certain and you can't see very well, what do? You've got to use your track in. So one thing that Jamie's always been really good at is he always keeps the track on as we come into an anchorage. So this means that if you can see nothing at all, you can just follow the track out and you know you're going to be safe to get to deeper water, and that's what we did that night. There have been other anchorages where this has happened, where we've been borne down by some massive, great other vessel of some kind.
We've been in, I can think of times that have happened in Turkey, and more recently was when we're in Toli Toli.
The worst one was in Toli Toli, where I did see my life flash before my eyes as I was trying to get the anchor up.
Liz had to go to the front of the boat and pull up 70 metres of chain as we had two, not one, but two fishing platforms dragging and bearing down on us. And I remember at the last moment, just as she got the anchor up, we were literally 10 metres away from the one on our port side. It had dragged 200 metres or so. It had literally dragged across the harbour and down our port side. Meanwhile, there was another fishing platform on our starboard side also dragging down. Now, you can imagine in these situations, they're pretty intense because, first of all, the visibility drops because you have so much rain. The winds pick up as well, so the boat is moving around. But on top of that, you're racing to pull up an anchor without catching any of the dragging vessels or platforms around you. So lots of things going on in those situations. And of course, the sea state had picked up as well. So poor old Liz is at the front of the boat with the boat bucking and bronking and going up and down like you wouldn't know. And of course, she has to stick to it and get that chain up while I'm at the helm trying to keep the boat in a straight line, because of course you can't weigh the anchor when the boat is being pulled at an angle, which is invariably what happens in these situations.
Again, a whiteout, couldn't see anything. We got the anchor out just in time as the platform ploughed through where we'd been anchored, and Jamie pulled us out and got us out very, very quickly. So just think about where you're anchoring, what's next to you. It's not about you dragging, it's about them dragging.
Sadly, one of the boats we were with did actually get hit by yet another platform. I think pretty much every single local boat dragged on that occasion. We were just lucky.
We all have our own individual fears, and mine is the next one. Mine is commercial vessels, particularly commercial vessels that don't have anyone on watch and who don't see you. You're a very tiny little boat in their world. So it's really important as cruisers that we take evasive action when we need to. And we're pretty good at this because it is such a big fear that we're always on watch and always very careful to see what's going on around us.
Now, on the whole, what we find is that commercial skippers are very responsible and responsive to you as well. But every now and then you will come across skippers who either don't speak English or don't monitor the VHF, and you can end up in some pretty tricky situations.
Sometimes it's easier at night because you can tell by the lights immediately which direction a vessel is going in, but sometimes it's easier in the day. And this particular one I'm going to talk about right now did happen recently, and it's still with me and it still shakes me up. It was my turn, I was on watch, Jamie'd done his, it was the middle of the night. There were a few fishing boats about. I don't mind fishing boats, know what they're up to. I can usually tell if they're stationary, if they're moving. They're fairly straightforward. Commercial boats too, you can normally tell what's going on because there's a nice big fat AIS signal showing you where they're going, what their speed is, and all the information that you need. And I could see one on AIS coming up behind us. He was going quite fast, he was doing 15 knots or so, and he was on a collision course with us. Now, our normal action with something like that is to watch to make sure that they're not moving, and if necessary, avoid ourselves at that stage. But normally what we do, the first thing we do is to get on the radio, make sure that they've seen us, just so that they know that we're there. And we've gone on the radio, and first of all, of course, they didn't answer me because I'm female. That quite often happens. I don't know if I've got a chip on my shoulder, but it does often happen that I don't get any kind of response. So I had to get Jamie up.
Fortunately, we did get through to him. However, this guy was rather confused. And I think with hindsight, quite often you are dealing with, they may be commercial skippers, but they are perhaps only used to their one particular set route. So when you ask them if they can deviate from that route, it throws them. And this is, I think, what happened in this particular instant. We managed to strike up a conversation with this guy, and we did point out that he was coming straight up behind us. Would he mind just altering course by 10 or so degrees? Even 5 degrees would have been enough.
Yes, yes, sir, we see you. Yes, yes, we will deviate. So that sounded all okay. Jamie's a bit sleepy and just kind of left me to it. So I kept watching, keeping our course because they were going to deviate.
That was all fine, and he was very obliging. The only thing is, he didn't change course.
AIS showed no deviation at all. So I got Jamie out again and a bit more involved this time. And of course, he didn't deviate at all. So Jamie got back on the radio and said, "You're not deviating. Are you going to change your course or aren't you?" I have changed my course. I think he'd moved it 1 degree. But I can see you, it's not a problem. Kept reassuring us. This went on until he got closer and closer, by which time it was too late for us to take evasive action because we didn't know whether he was going to at the last minute or what he was going to do. So we had to keep straight on our course so that we were sending out proper signals.
Anyway, we realised afterwards that he was getting confused because he supposedly could see us on AIS, but couldn't see us out at sea. You have to remember, of course, and we've been told this by commercial skippers, that their visibility of tiny little sailboats is minimal.
We got up on deck and shone torches at our sails so that we were more visible, because I had a theory that he was looking at the fishing boat on our port bow and thinking that was us. And that turned out to be the case. This guy in this vessel said he could see us, was taking evasive action to miss the fishing boat that he thought was us, was actually ploughing straight into us.
That's just one of many examples in which commercial boats can come bearing down at you. And don't forget, these things move fast. Some of them are moving at 15 knots. That's not a lot of thinking time to make any decisions.
It was a very, very scary moment, and it made me realise just how vulnerable we are. Now, we got through it by telling him this. Jamie said, "You are looking at a fishing boat. We are the sailing vessel. We have lit all our lights. We have put a torch on the sail. Oh yes, I see you." Immediately he moved. That was good. That was one of the worst ones I can remember.
I think the biggest lesson to learn from dealing with commercial ships is not to be afraid to communicate with them on the VHF. They are normally the most responsive because they are used to dealing with the VHF and used to talking to many different people out at sea. So more often than not, you find 90% of the time that they will respond. And more importantly, they are very obliging as well. I remember a time when I was crossing over the English Channel with a sailing buddy many years ago. And I lost count the amount of commercial ships we got in touch with. And each and every one was able to deviate by 5 or 10 degrees from their course, providing you give them enough notice. And I think that's the big lesson here, is do not leave things till the last minute, and do not be afraid of getting in contact with them on the VHF. No matter how unprofessional or how irritating you think you may sound, it is far better to be overcautious than to be risk-taking in those situations.
Sailing south across the Banda Sea was something we were looking forward to, but the weather wasn't great. So we were holed up in a little anchorage, just waiting for it to change.
We had made our way around the bottom side of Sulawesi on the south side, and we had to make a big jump across a stretch of water, which is about 120 or so miles. So it was a day and a night. And unfortunately, we were hit by some bad weather. Fortunately, we were able to find an anchorage off a tiny island, and we had just enough internet connection to keep an eye on the weather.
Jamie was checking and looking and making sure it was okay, but we needed to move because we had to get to Lombok. We had to do a visa run because of blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so we were under a deadline, and he found a little break. He found a little break in the weather, and Jamie said, we're going to go, and off we went. And sure enough, it was fine. We left the anchorage. I mean, I say anchorage, it was a tiny island with a tiny little beach which we were sheltering behind. And we set off through an atoll. It wasn't great. The water was rather choppy, and the wind wasn't really particularly favourable, but we were getting enough of an angle to be going the right way. But as we left the atoll and got further out into deep water, the wind got stronger and became more and more difficult. The angle was definitely not helping us sail. And as that happened, it's a big stretch of water. The waves really started to build.
The forecast wasn't really what we were expecting, and we were hit by enormous waves, and I think our speed dropped down to about 1.5, 2 knots.
We were literally not making any headway, and the only way we could move anywhere was to go left or right, and that would have taken us completely in the wrong direction. So we tried, and then eventually we made the decision to turn back because the clouds were getting worse and the sky was getting blacker and blacker and the rain was pouring down.
And we quickly realised that if the school wasn't going to go away, or even if it did, the sea state would remain and that our progress would be hampered, and it was absolutely pointless motor sailing at 1.5 knots on a 120-mile passage. So we made the quick decision to turn around and go back into our anchorage, which by then actually had got a little bit unsettled, but certainly gave us a lot more protection than had we gone out to sea.
Took the decision to go back, and I'm really glad that we did. It turned out to be the right decision because there was a front coming forward that hadn't really been predicted properly, and it was a bad one. We got to the island, back to where we were, dropped the hook and remained there for 3 days while we waited for it to finish and to give us some better weather to leave. So I think that the lesson we learned there, well, there were two really. I mean, the first one is that if you're not sure, turn back. Don't be too proud. We both felt a sense of failure in having to turn back, but it was the right decision. Now, if we'd been in those conditions out at sea somewhere with no opportunity to turn back, we'd have probably heaved to, or we would have probably just reduced sail and got through it. But as it was, we had the option to turn back, and it was the right thing to do.
Don't be proud. Don't be a hero sailor. If you feel that you are putting yourselves or your vessel in danger, or you're just going to have a very uncomfortable passage, if you have the option, back off, turn around, go back into a safe anchorage, into a safe harbour, and wait it out.
But the second one is not to sail to a deadline, because I think we took the decision to leave because we thought we needed to go, so let's go. And we took a little bit of a chance on the weather. It was the wrong decision. So sailing to a deadline, we always say don't sail to a deadline. In fact, we try to make our lives without deadlines. The only deadlines we have is to make these videos. And that's pretty good. You need something in your life to give you structure. But yet, leaving on a deadline was not the best thing to do. That's it then, that's our 5 worst things, with, I hope, some lessons learned. If you enjoyed that, and if you've got some lessons of your own from terrible experiences that you've had, we'd love to hear them in the comments. But for now, thanks for watching, peace and fair winds.